Hey everybody, it's Dr. Blake, the Cooking Doc. I'm so glad you're here today joining me. We've got a really special recipe for you today. We're going to do things a little bit differently. So typically we'll take a short recipe, we'll make it fresh, we'll make it healthy, it'll cook quickly. Today we're going to make something that takes a little bit longer. We're going to develop flavors over a longer period of time, and we're going to make a vegan bolognese. Typically, a bolognese has a lot of meat in it, right? It's got beef, it's got pork, sometimes it's got veal, and that's the way that you develop these rich, robust, creamy flavors. You let them cook over a long period of time. But the problem with that is that all that red meat and all that fat is not good for you, right? And so it's real important for us to take foods that are high in saturated fat or really meat heavy and make them taste good. So bolognese is a perfect one to do because we have to figure out how to develop that creamy, rich, robust flavor, and our secret ingredient is going to be mushrooms. So let's make that recipe, and let's make it totally vegan. So if you've ever had a vegan recipe that you kind of took a meat recipe, made it a vegan recipe, you often notice that the final result is flat. Not a lot of flavor. And you're like, man, why did I go vegan in the first place? This is not nearly as good as the meat sauces. So we are going to try to avoid all of that today. And we're going to use layer upon layer upon layer of flavor and really build that out so it tastes unbelievable. So we've got an onion, and I'm going to chop one whole onion. So we do want our onion to be chopped into fairly similar pieces as the carrot and celery we're going to use. A bunch of slices sideways. Bunch of slices long ways. And then we're going to chop it. I used to have a commenter that commented every time that my knives weren't sharp. So now I sharpen my knives before every cooking show. And we're also going to prep some celery and some carrots. It's kind of a traditional mirepoix, which gives a lot of the flavor, the depth of flavor to a recipe like this. Now, if you've never chopped carrots before, it takes a little practice. Take the carrot, cut off the ends, cut it in half, give it some cuts lengthwise, do that to both sides, cut it into maybe 1/4 inch slices. Then we're just going to turn them and chop them into little pieces. I have decent knife skills as a chef, but I could never be a surgeon. Seems like a lot of carrot, but the carrot really adds a lot of sweetness to this dish that you may not get because you're not using meat. I'm going to slice up our celery here and cut the ends off. Cut our celery into strips. And we're going to do the same thing we did with the carrots. Chop them into nice little pieces. This is going to be the base of our flavor as we create a delicious taste. And our next ingredient to help us create that robust, delicious flavor is mushrooms. And I've got a ton of shiitake mushrooms to show you. Shiitake mushrooms are very healthy in that they've got antioxidants in them, which may help to decrease inflammation and sometimes help your cells heal. They also are full of a lot of vitamins and minerals that are great additions to your diet. So you think about this, we are substituting shiitake mushrooms, which have all these health beneficial properties, in for meat, which is something that you're trying to cut down on in your diet. And that's what makes this really an unbelievable recipe and a way to convert to a plant-based diet. We're taking out the red meat and we're subbing in a pound of shiitake mushrooms. First thing we're going to do is we are going to cut off the little tips here, put them to the side, and then just kind of break up the stems and break them in half. And then we're going to put them in a blender and kind of make them appear like the texture of ground beef. Leave me a comment below if you've ever used shiitake mushrooms or any kind of mushrooms as a substitute for ground beef. The other thing that's great about using mushrooms in this food is mushrooms are one of the foods that are really high in glutamic acid. And that glutamic acid or glutamate is really what gives food its umami flavor. So umami is that part of the flavor that really just makes you want to keep eating more and more. We're actually using two kinds of mushrooms in this dish, shiitake mushrooms, and we're using dried porcini mushrooms. So we're going to take half of those shiitake mushrooms and put them in our food processor. And then we're going to pulse them about 10 to 15 times. All right. Perfect. You don't want to put the food processor all the way on because then your mushroom really will be blasted into these tiny little bits that won't have any texture in your final sauce. So you want to have some texture in this recipe. And these are dried porcini mushrooms that I've had sitting in some lukewarm water for about 45 minutes. The dried mushrooms and the liquid that they are sitting in has so much flavor to add to this dish. So there are some keys about preparing dried mushrooms. The first is you got to let them sit with lukewarm water. The second is you have to drain them. Just going to put them on our cutting board. Do not throw this mushroom water out. This is pure flavor gold. And we'll just leave a little bit in the bottom of the cup here where the dirt gets real heavy. Just give them a few rough chops. All right, who's ready to cook? Now comes the fun part. We've got our cast iron Dutch oven, one of my favorite pots to use. We're gonna put it over some medium heat. We're gonna add some vegan butter. This is 3 tablespoons of vegan butter. We gotta get fat in this recipe somehow. Without the meat, the butter will add that. And then we've got about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Add that as well. And I'm gonna add onions. So this is our 1 chopped onion. And I'm gonna add this before that oil heats up and all the butter melts. All right, we're just gonna give that a little stir. So that's kind of controversial, adding the onions at the same time as I add the butter and the olive oil. I find that this tends to make the onions cook a little more slowly and kind of develop flavor a little better. But maybe leave a comment. What do you do at home? One of the ways to make sure you're making good, healthy food is to make it taste good, right? And develop flavor without all the tricks that you would use if you were trying to make an unhealthy dish. So what do you do if you're making an unhealthy food that you want to taste good? How do you do it? You fry it, right? You add a ton of salt, right? You add a whole bunch of cream, right? I mean, there's all these tricks that you can do. Those are easy. It's not so easy when you're making healthy food or vegan food. So it takes a little more time. First thing is you cook the onions, the celery, and the carrots. That gives a great base to any dish you're making. Just when those onions start to turn translucent is when we're gonna add the celery and the carrots. This is my favorite part. Something about scraping off these fresh vegetables into the pot. Now we're gonna let that cook down about 5-7 minutes. So just when those carrots start to get soft and sweet, we're gonna add the mushrooms in, because the mushrooms don't take as long to cook. And the mushrooms will soak up a lot of the oil that you've already got in your pot. We are going to add a little more olive oil, another tablespoon or so, a pinch of kosher salt, and some freshly ground pepper. Now, as the water releases from these mushrooms, you may find that the mushrooms stick a little bit to the bottom of the pot. That's okay. That's how you really develop some more flavor, because we're going to be adding a lot of liquid later, and that liquid is going to bring that flavorful taste off the bottom of the pan. Those kind of little browned mushroom bits will add a lot of deep taste to this dish. So those mushrooms are starting to stick a bit. I just got my spoon and scrape them off every now and again. After those mushrooms have cooked about 5 to 7 minutes, now we're going to add some of our liquid. The first is with milk. So traditionally in a bolognese, you may have either whole milk or a little heavy cream that's added to make the sauce rich, and that kind of boils down, gets sucked into the meat and into the vegetables, but we don't want to use heavy cream. So I am going to use some oat milk. It's creamier than all of the other non-dairy milks. You don't want to use coconut milk, right? Because I don't want this to taste like coconut. We got a cup of unsweetened oat milk. And at the same time, we're gonna add our mushroom water. Again, the mushroom water is like our flavor bomb, and this is all gonna reduce down and concentrate into these vegetables. I give that a nice little stir. Get those bits off the bottom. We're going to bring this to a medium boil and let all of that water boil off. And so the mushrooms themselves contain a lot of water, so this may take between 5 and 10 minutes before all the water is boiled off. You don't want to do it too fast, so kind of a medium boil is the way to go. While that milk is boiling off, we're going to add just a splash of nutmeg. Now that that water is about boiled off, we're going to add our wine. The wine's going to reduce just like the other water and create more flavor as it reduces. I prefer a dry white wine for this part. You could also use a red wine if you wanted. I'll pour it in and let it boil off. Once that wine is just about boiled off, we're going to add our tomatoes, and then we're going to let it sit. The tomatoes we're using are whole peeled tomatoes. There are a lot of different types of tomatoes you can choose. These are not low sodium, which isn't too bad, especially when it's getting diluted into a big dish like this. The other thing is we're not adding a lot of salt to the dish. So some of our salt comes from the sodium, and the tomatoes will simmer for a couple of hours and really concentrate more flavor. Think about all the ways we've added flavor to this dish, starting with the celery and the carrots and the onions, and then adding the mushrooms, lots of flavor, then adding the mushroom sauce, then adding the milk, then adding the wine. Now we're going to add tomatoes. I'm going to just take a little knife here, and I'm just going to cut them up a little bit so they're not so big. You could do this on a little cutting board, but I found this works pretty well. And in we go. If there's any big pieces left, we could just cut them here. Give that a stir. We're going to bring this all the way up to a boil again, so I'm going to turn the heat up. And once that comes to a boil, we are going to turn it back down to a simmer, and we are just going to let it sit. We don't want a heavy boil because then all the water will kind of escape and the flavors won't have a chance to concentrate as well as if we do a slow boil. So this tomato sauce has now been simmering at just barely a simmer for about 2.5 hours. And as you can see, the water and the wine and everything has almost boiled fully out, and we are going to add lentils. The first reason to add lentils here is it gives the dish another texture. These are lentils that are cooked till they're almost done, maybe about 20 minutes. Those lentils will soak up a lot of that tomato flavor, and they will add protein to the dish. They will add some vegetable protein to the dish, make it a little more filling. Lentils are also full of soluble fiber, and soluble fiber is very important to help you maintain healthy gut health and also to help manage your blood sugars if you're diabetic. So we are going to add 3/4 cup of lentils and let that cook another 10 minutes. And then we're going to be good to go. Right before our sauce is ready to eat, we're going to start getting our pasta ready to go. Pasta noodles, I'm going to add in. They're only going to cook for a couple minutes. You could also use rigatoni. We don't want to cook the noodles too long. We want them to be al dente when they come out because we're going to finish them in the pasta sauce. Let's drain our noodles. We're going to save just about 1/2 cup of this pasta water. It's got a little bit of starch in it. Sometimes we'll need that to help the flavors come together. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of that reserved pasta water. We're going to add a couple spoonfuls of the sauce in there. We're going to let those noodles finish cooking in the sauce. So it mixes together just like a traditional bolognese. It's got tons of flavor, not a lot of salt, no saturated fat. Beautiful little serving there. And I do like to top it with a little Parmesan cheese. We'll use the vegan Parmesan cheese just to keep this recipe totally vegan. A little bit of regular Parmesan cheese would be great on top as well. That really kicks the flavor into high gear when you take that finishing bite. Just a beautiful, beautiful meal. That was so good. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you learned something. Make sure you click the subscribe button at the bottom. Comment, let me know what you think, hit the like button, and hit that little bell. That way you'll know every time I send a new video up to YouTube.